I suggest you study this.
I have this theory that I've been kicking around for probably the past 2 months. Now, this is something that I came up with. It was something I couldn't really put into words to explain to people. So I think that this might be the best way to explain it, but maybe not. If you don't understand it, I'm sorry, but this is one of my theories, so good luck. The jar theory. There are many things that we cannot understand, and few things that we can understand. You have a jar. Everything that we can understand or comprehend is in this jar. Everything else is outside of the jar. Not literally, but this is the best way that I can explain it. So we have this idea of God. Whether it's a religious idea of God or otherwise, it's in the jar.
But why?
Because we can think of God. We can know God. Maybe you believe that God is out there somewhere. Maybe in another dimension or in another universe. Maybe so, but God is still in the jar. The jar is restricting us. Beyond the universe, the parallel universe, the illusory universe, the astral plane, heaven, hell, gravity, the laws of physics, the idea of infinity, they're all in the jar. Yes, even the idea that reality is illusory is in the jar. Please do not think of the jar as an actual physical place. Time and space exist within the jar, so anything beyond that cannot be comprehended. Whatever is outside the jar is probably everywhere and nowhere, not physically outside the jar, or not physically outside of this place, however you want to interpret it. So the jar holds every idea, thought, memory, etc. that we have here. Everything that occurs within us also occurs within the jar. Anything else, the jar is not able to hold. So whatever occurs outside the jar cannot be known or comprehended. We've already stated this. If it could be known or comprehended, then it would not be outside the jar. It would be inside the jar. Do you kind of understand what I'm saying? Kind of? So basically, everything we've ever known, all knowledge that we've gained, was gained inside the jar. If you have to ask the question, is it in the jar? Then yes, it is. If you can think it, it's in here. Even imaginary things. So if we live in this infinite universe, we should be given infinite possibilities, right? So let's think of that word for one moment. Infinite. I like that word, infinite. I honestly don't believe that we can ever fully understand what it means. We can know what it means, yet knowing and understanding are two different things. Eventually it would have to go in a loop. I'm not saying that the infinite universe works in a loop, but it's like if you had a checkerboard that went on infinitely, you could draw a different picture in all the different squares an infinite number of times. But eventually you're going to end up drawing the same picture in two different squares, right down to the most minute detail. Okay, now, try to process this. Not only will there eventually be a duplicate picture made, but that picture is going to be duplicated an infinite number of times. This means that the universe that we live in has an infinite number of duplicate universes. Isn't that crazy? This goes way beyond the math that we know. So this idea that we are so desperately trying to understand is in the jar as well. Whatever is inside the jar has been separated from whatever is outside of the jar. Yet whatever is outside the jar is not exactly separate from what's inside the jar. The jar just sits here and it looks like a regular jar. Yet whatever is outside the jar is not really separate from what's inside the jar. What we know and experience is inside the jar. Everything else is infinite. So we could say the jar is sitting in an infinite space. It's sealed and it's made of tinted glass. We'll pretend it's made of tinted glass. Everything inside cannot see out, yet everything outside can see in. So by now I hope you can kind of sort of grasp this concept. We can only know what's inside the jar. Everything outside the jar cannot be comprehended. I know I said this already, but that's very, very important. We can expand the jar, however. The more we are able to understand, the more space the jar occupies in this infinite space. Remember, it's not a literal infinite space it's sitting in. This is just the best way I can describe it. So now that we know this, how can I say this the best way? Okay. Get ready for it. Are you ready? Yes. The jar is your brain. Whoa! Now, if everything I was saying before wasn't making too much sense, try and think of it in this way. I could not just come out and describe your brain the same way that I would have described the jar. If I would have, you would have thought, But I really, really want you to look at it in a different light. I want you to see it in a different way. We are not trapped within the jar. Just look at the amount of beauty that we can create within the jar. Look at the amount of love that exists within the jar. Free will exists within the jar. You have free will within the jar. Every enjoyable moment, every feeling of love, every emotion you have ever felt occurred within the jar. You are in the jar, so why not just accept it and enjoy it? Let's create something good in the jar. Come on, people. Let's make this jar worth living in. Could you follow that?